Great pleasure, really, to have been able to celebrate Sri Aurobindo's 150th anniversary through this platform called PLAF, Pondicherry's Literature and Arts Festival. This is the first edition, and we made it a very boutique event. Yesterday we had the beginning with sound healing, followed by a very beautiful presentation by Shashank. And of course, Mahesh Viku Vinayakram also did the invocations, followed by the Ghatam player Hariharan and Trichy Krishnaswamy. Sudeep read the poem of Sri Aurobindo, and it was one of the most beautiful beginnings of any festival that I've done. This is my second festival. The first was the Pondicherry Literature Festival, which I had founded and curated as co-curator with another curator. The title of this festival is called Towards the Essence. The idea is to look at not just the artificial, but also go deeper. That's why many of us live in Pondicherry, because we are interested in the essence. To discover the inner self, to do the yoga which is shown to us through great masters. We have covered topics of emotion, poetics, environment. We have had great minds. So today's topic is going to be Towards the Essence. I'm very grateful that Madam Jayanti Ravi is with us. I'm very grateful that Sabin Iqbal, also a very known curator for large literary festival, is with us, Matribhumi, and he's also been part of the Kochi Biennale, along with Abhay, who's going to come over a little later to do some reading with him. And I'm very happy to have Dr. Arsheya Sethi, who's an old friend and who has done a lot of research. With this, I hand the mic over to Sudeep to, okay, he already has one. So we are dedicating this festival to the divine. That is why we decided that everything that we have here should be sublime. Thank you. We have managed till now.
So good evening, namaskar, namaskar. It's lovely to be here as always, and it's been a real treat and pleasure to co-found, co-curate the festival with Lalit. Lalit brings the arts expertise in. I brought the literature side in. The whole idea was to have it in an intimate space, fewer people, deeper discussions, more camaraderie, more hand-holding, support, without losing any of the intellectual rigor and the essence itself. And we've had an astonishing start, and this is the ending, the two events, the three events we have now. So all the people who've taken part in it have already touched upon the subjects of into the essence, emotion, ecology, humanism, and because they are writers and artists and researchers, they've actually shown that through their work. But today we'll sort of delve a little bit deeper into it. So perhaps maybe I could start with Arshiya. Since you spoke so beautifully about the non-gharana aspect of it, it was quite a revelation. In fact, some of the students came up to me and said, you know, this is such, it was, I want to go and read the book. And I said, you must, because she's here, and get it signed. Talk about how emotion fits in to that fabric of tutelage, the fabric of guru-shishya relationship, because Gharana at one level talks about that, but very importantly, you also brought out the fact that sometimes history is fabricated, Gharanas are constructed because of a certain kind of lineage that needs to be put forth. So perhaps you can touch on that and talk about that.
Thank you very much, Sudeep. And namaskar to all of you. I don't know if you were there in the morning, but there were two parts in which I was able to participate. And I mentioned this only because both parts weave into your question. So it is true that our arts are very important, our real heritage, much like ecology, they are as vulnerable and as necessary to us as our systems are. So looking after our arts is valuable. But when I say this, I don't want to at all suggest that the state is solely responsible for looking into the arts. I think the arts are the people's heritage and must remain in that field. So even the tendency on part of human beings is always to try and control things. So in a way, the gharana system that got developed had some advantages in the sense that there was a pedagogy involved, that there was a lineage involved, but it was also an exclusivist lineage. So for a very long time, only those born into the bloodline could learn the arts. And then came the changes around the time that we as a people started asserting ourselves, and this is before independence. And we were able to break through this shackles of the lineage. They say discipleship is of many kinds. Dissent is one, and dissent, not agreeing dissent, is another way of creating discipleship. So you move away. We have examples of discipleship in India which are unmatched anywhere in the world. Ecology. But that is also a sad story, and that brings me to what I really want to say. I am quite sick and tired of the embellished aspect of the arts, where it twinkles and shines and is burnished, and you look at the beauty of the art. I think there is an urgency that the arts have to respond to, and frankly the arts are the strongest response that we can create, which is to create a more just society. And so the end of every artistic performance should not be brilliance or just showing a lot of jazz and jazzy look, but hitting us here and hitting us here, so that we can speed up, first by changing our attitudes, and then by actually initiating where we have a chance of initiating, by effort, by influence, by guidance or inspiration. Bring in that more just world. Sri Aurobindo was also one looking for a more just world than what he had been born into. So I think that this festival happening here, that you gave me a chance to say this from this platform, it's not accidental. I think there was something divine that is at play.
Yes. I mean, the stars are always aligned, and the nakshatra has been pre-planned and preordained in one way. We are just little particles of atoms that, inhabit it. I'm interested in carrying on the idea of the unphotoshopping of the arts presentation, which is to say that abhinay over presentation, perhaps, the way people are more keen on being photographed rather than the content. And we had a wonderful example. We had a beautiful concert, Shashank, in the ashram. It was like unplugged. Under the tree, with lightning at the back, everybody was on the floor. Simple sound system and pure joy of enunciation of music itself through the vocal cords, which then touch your heart and the head, as opposed to super edited, oversaturated presentation of the arts. Sabin, you have delved into, in your novels, in fact, one of the interesting things you were talking about, in a way you mollified it by saying the three layers in your village, Arakal, which stops at the cliff, and the three communities that live there, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Hindus, and how the food is connecting and disconnecting. The fact that mutton curry was being cooked, and the wafting of those beautiful, luscious smells are both seductive at the same time disturbing to certain communities depending on which way it goes. How does that element and the ecology and the architecture of that setting work out? Because you actually have thought through it before you put it in the book, and it is a political thing, and it's an act by choice. Tell us creatively how you map things like that out. Put it in the book, and it is a political thing, and it's an act by choice. Tell us creatively how you map things like that out.
Thanks, Sudeep. Once again, thank you for having me here. So, first time to Pondi. Always wanted to come to Pondi, but I could never make it. But then, it's like serendipity, you know. So happy to be in Pondi. Thank you to be part of PLAF. It's a privilege and an honor. Yes, Sudeep. When you know, I grew up in a village, which is in Varkala, which is in Trivandrum district in the south of Kerala. When we grew up as children, I used to eat from my house and my friend's house. It doesn't matter whether I'm a Muslim family or Hindu family, there's nothing, you know. So we grew up together, my friends and all that, you know. But now I'm quite sad to see that things are being polarized now. Food is one, as you said. You know, then it kept me thinking, and this place, the cliff, the novel, what he quoted is from my first novel, The Cliffhangers. The Cliffhangers is a cliff. Varkala has a beautiful cliff, and the story is about four boys. They call the gang the Cliffhangers. You know, they hang out at the cliff, and the cliff is a tourist attraction. You know, you have rows of shacks overlooking the cliff. The cliff on the cliff overlooking the sea. Then, as I said, you know, that's a road behind it, and behind that road is a masjid, and around it, you know, a community of Muslims live. And a few meters down the road, there is Janardana Swami temple, and around it, Hindus live. So it picked actually my imagination, and there is mutton or beef being cooked on a Friday in these houses, and there is breeze from the sea. It picks the aroma of this meat and takes it to the priest's kitchen, which they can't tolerate because it's meat. You know, so there is another line I forgot to read, that the priest's wife actually takes, you know, she smells the sambar and she wants that kayam, you know, she wants to smell. This is about our conditioning, our cultural conditioning. You know, so this is where contemporary India is. And I know before my publisher, first they took it to the legal department to vet it. You know, that's a sad side. You know, that is what I said. You know, they said everything is fine, then we will print. You know, so I'm trying to see this. I'm sad. I'm sad at this juncture. You know, of everything is looked up with another, you know, a set of so to speak, you know, lens and eyes. That is an attempt I try to portray. You know, we are one. You know, I said one through art. What is it called? So this is oneness through art. We cut your body, my body, everyone's body. It's the same. So why the difference? So I was trying to address that pertinent, rather disturbing question of polarization, which is there in the contemporary society, especially for a society like in Kerala, which is, we call it educated, 100% literacy, it's still there, and disturbingly there. You know, that was an attempt.
Yeah, and you know, that's why we as writers have the extra responsibility to put forth through fiction what is actually non-fiction. Same thing with poetry or painting or films in many ways. You touched upon something that is making me kind of not very happy, because I'm very wedded to my country and the culture of my country and the cultures of my country and the cultures of elsewhere. having grown up in a very typical Bengali family in India, diasporic Bengali family in India, we didn't have any of the differences. In fact, as children, we thought it's an excuse because you have to go to the festival. My Muslim friends were having festival, which meant food and holiday. The Christians had theirs. I went to a Christian school. I started my day with the Lord's Prayer and ended my night in Bengali songs. And similarly, so it was a very, very different India we grew up in, and now I can't recognize myself or the country I'm in. We won't get into that conversation because it's volatile. But the fact that we have to be forcibly breathing air which is being controlled by pollutants of different kinds, whether it's the AQI level or the QI level or the IQ level, insidiously being done through various means. You are a history nerd. You were passionate about Pataliputra today, and it was wonderful actually to hear you read out and then footnoting or prefacing, or I love the white margin comments you were making about actually Megasthenes wrote this without a bias, and then there's various kinds of embellishments that happen. Why are we in this situation? And why are we as writers and artists have to be on our guard to say what we should be doing in any case?
Honestly, Sudeep, I don't know. I'll have to disagree with you there, because writing, and like I said, I'm a history nerd. I will always go back to history. If you look at writing through the ages, it has always had some kind of political angle. If I look at, say, for instance, when my current book is about medieval India, and for the primary source, I'm looking at a book called Akbarnama, which is written by Abul Fazl, and it is the most complete account of that period. But the fact is that Abul Fazl was a court historian, he was a hagiographer. So therefore, everything he writes is slanted to a bias that favors not only a man who was his friend, but also his emperor. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that everything, and I say this again and again, even when I talk to my students, is that at the end of the day, every book is a POV, is a point of view. And when you are writing a book, no matter, or when you're doing any kind of artistic expression, not just book, even when you're dancing, and I'm sure you would agree with me, when you're dancing, when you're making music, everything is your point of view, that you're expressing yourself, right? And so it is with words as well. So I don't agree that that writers are not expressing themselves. They are, and they have, and there has been points of view and counterpoints of view, maybe more so today than it was 1,000 years ago, but I'm quite sure that when Kalidasa was writing his exotic lines about the beauty of Shipra in Meghadutam, there would have been people who would say that, Shipra also has another quality to it. Maybe there were pickpockets on the, on the lanes and by-lanes of Shipra, or maybe the Mahakal temple was too crowded on days of Aarti worship. So what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, I truly believe that every expression, artistic expression, is a point of view, and at the end of the day, when you're looking at it, you're looking at it through the creator's eyes.
Yeah, so there's no disagreement as far as I'm concerned. Hagiography is one thing. See, non-fiction writing and hagiography and historical writing is a particular kind of POV you're talking about. Creative writing is a very different thing. I mean, when you're talking about pure literary fiction or drama or poetry, you're actually creating, and you leave the interpretation for the readers to make. So you need that sense of unshackling. What he was referring to is what something I've also faced, that manuscripts have to be vetted by the legal department. Which word are we? No. So what I'm saying is, they have to do it because they are also being scanned. It's not as though they want to do it. Very recently, I was at a festival, and I was expressly told that please do not read these two pieces because the stance is not that favorable to the current dispensation. Of course, as a civilized person, you say, sure, I won't do it. But that act itself is sacrilegious in a way. That's what I think Sabine is trying to say. What do you think, Jayanti, about this? You've written about sanitization, but how sanitized are we getting? Is it purification of a particular kind, or is it spraying of a certain angle of certain colors?
First of all, Sudeep, the book that I've written is not on sanitization, which is more the COVIDization of what we've all come to see, think, believe. I was also the Principal Secretary Health in Gujarat for 4 years. But before that, this was all about something, you know, a lot of times we elite tend to only be confined to our points of view, our problems, our India, but there's a larger India. And to ignore that, I think, is also extremely insensitive. And I think this book was called Sanity in Sanitation, which is about, you know, to talk about all this. We have the privilege of discussing all this, but I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when all across the world, India was also infamous for being the open defecation capital of the world, where we couldn't give women and children the dignity of having a toilet. And even if toilets were built, you needed more of a behavior change. I remember going to a village. I still remember the name of the village, called Oont Khari in district Anand in Gujarat. It was not about brick and mortar, because oftentimes the whole conversation is about, you know, build toilets, it'll get done. That was what had been done over the years. But I think this is about behavior change. And I think all of us ought to be sensitive to this behavior change in all walks of life. We cannot have one mainstream way of thinking which alone will be the point. It's either this or the other. But we have to be sensitive, as was mentioned by Nandini. I'm sorry, I'm new here. We have to be sensitive that there is Indian knowledge systems. There have been things which have been also not given an equal footing. I mean, I think all of us, a lot of us are a product. I mean, I had the privilege of studying in about 10 different schools across India and the world, also graduated from Harvard, and I'm very proud of that as well. But I think we were all a product of the Western way of thinking, which is what we are trying to break now with a sledgehammer, in a way to say that if you're celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, he's again somebody who grew up in Oxford but had the courage. And that's what we should have. If there's something that we realize is truthful, we should have the courage to be able to speak for it, bat for it, practice it, profess it. It can't be just a superficial. So Sanity in Sanitation was about how do you get people to realize the value of sanitation? How do you get India to have, for the Prime Minister to have the courage to speak from the ramparts of the Red Fort about something that may sound as silly. Sometimes people may dismiss it off and say that, hey, are you talking about toilets? But to have the courage and say that, well, if I see women going out in the dark, and now with, you know, fewer coverage, why should they go out and defecate there when they have this? There are crimes against women perpetrated. If there's a lady who's just had her baby pregnant, I mean, is this acceptable? I don't think so in a civilized society. And therefore, I think it's about being sensitive to all of this. And I remember a conversation as we were returning from this village, Oont Khari. I had an executive assistant of mine, his name was Yogi, and again, a very fine person who had been trained. So after engaging in the village and doing what was known as triggering is a kind of provocation where you ask people and use the choicest of words which normally would be taboo in a conversation. We had to use words, the equivalent of shit, fecal matter. I'm sorry to say that, because again, if you shroud it in all this, then you're not able to deal with the problem. And we had to use words like goo in Hindi, which meant fecal matter. So when you did that and spoke to them, you found that a young girl there, she was barely in her 9th grade. I still remember her name, Jyotsna. The patriarchs in the house were not keen on a toilet. For them, that was the last thing that mattered. But I could see this girl somewhere hiding there, her eyes, saying a story which was far more powerful. She was crying for a toilet, to have that little luxury, which for a lot of us is a necessity. I mean, it's something that we just take for granted. So when we returned back in the car after all this, and almost using some histrionics, sometimes you have to, when you talk of sometimes force, maybe it's needed because it's not a fair level playing field. I mean, this child would not have had access to a toilet if we had allowed status quo to persist. So somebody had to speak for her. But on the way back, my executive assistant asked me this question. He said, ma'am, he was almost indoctrinated by the villagers there. He was talking with the men folk and I wanted an open conversation. He said, ma'am, they asked me a question. All these years, they've always defecated in the open. And you're telling them now to get confined to a 3 by 3 foot room, which we call a toilet, which is foreign, not something that they used to, and use that for defecation. And he says you're expecting them to change. The question to him was, would all of you start, can you defecate in the open? So I almost thought, these are conversations important, but you have to invoke compassion, sometimes even disgust, the harm it can cause. But I think eventually what you said, all this discussion, debate is not just about equality, like Sri Aurobindo, coming back to that, which is the central pivotal point. He spoke about these 3 nuanced words, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which was the buzzword for the French Revolution. And he said, on the one hand, you can talk of equality and go the communist way, not that, and he says, but that doesn't, USSR, Soviet Union did crumble. So that may not be sustainable. On the other hand, you may just talk of liberty, but you find that there is the Occupy Wall Street movement. Just cutthroat competition and market forces alone is not going to work. So you probably need fraternity to top it all. So that has to come from that place of sensitivity, which I think should allow for some of the facts that you said. You can't just have one dominant point of view, but I think it should also allow that little pride in our own selves as well. I mean, why should we feel a little embarrassed about having to profess or practice or speak in Sanskrit, or probably practice our own classical music? I mean, sometimes there is this feeling of almost having to cringe. Why is it that every Indian is also not given the pride of owning their own language, their culture? When I went to teach at Harvard, I would wear a sari and a bindi. Not that you don't wear other clothes, but I think I am also entitled to my identity with a sense of pride. And what's wrong in it? Why do we all want to wear trousers? And it's simple tokenism. I'm not saying this makes no difference, perhaps, but I think there is this point of view too, which we have to respect.
Sure. It's a point well taken, and I think we'll sort of try and bring it back to literature and the arts, because that's the sort of forum. Lalit, I wonder what you think. I don't think anybody is in disagreement in terms of the basic tenets of having pride about your country, the clothes you wear, the languages. Privilege is a problematic thing anyway, because the moment you're educated in a country where the numbers are so skewed, knowledge is such an agency, as we know. I grew up in a very, very normal, middle-class, sari-wearing, pajama-wearing family who could speak French like you, and family has been to Oxford and Harvard, and yet we do voluntary work, and my mother teaches in a school, and that is not the issue. I don't think elitism, again, the certain definition of elitism also becomes very fossilized, because that's one kind of elitism. There's a lot of people in the middle ground who straddle both ways and are trying to do the best. What do you think, as a kind of arts curator, practitioner, someone who takes photographs, and I see your frames, they're so vividly judicious, So when the sadhu has the hair flinging that way, I see why you've cropped the picture at a certain point, because if you hadn't, narrative of that swirl would change. Maybe you can pick it up there, because it's very important for writers and artists and so on to take those decisions.
So, I don't know if I am able to answer to you the way you want it, but being the title of this evening, Towards the Essence, I find that my country makes me feel extraordinarily proud because it deals mostly with things which go deep into the essence. It's not artificial. There is a lot of things to be cleaned and cleared and improved, but I'm so proud of this country for being a country where I can, through the arts, I can have a Muslim dancer perform a totally Hindu dance for a Christmas party at a Sikh friend's house. And I have had it. Sri Aurobindo has relooked at the essence of things. And that is why when I first did the first literature festival was inspired by a word which has an essence in it, and that word came to me when I saw two groups of dancers dancing the same form, the Odyssey. One had extraordinary embellishments, perfection in form. There was no mistake. And everything was so beautiful that visually you would go, wow. And then very soon after that, I found dancers coming from the village of India, Odisha, and they danced the same dance. And they were not as beautiful, they were in fact fat. They were not as extraordinarily dressed because they did not have the money to buy the same kinds of clothes. But when they performed, I cried. So what was it? And I went on trying to find out what is the essential difference between the essence of the two forms and the two dancers, and I found the word that this group was coming from a foreign land and they were practicing the Indian form, and the village came from actually Orissa, and suddenly this word came as an answer to me, and the word was Bharata Shakti. So the literature festival that I founded and did previous to this one was titled Bharata Shakti. And I wanted to understand what is Bharata Shakti. That is why I actually jumped into this festival.
So, Lalit, I also want to bring you to something that you said maybe yesterday or day before. You see, the whole idea of it, if we all happily agree, then the point of a discussion is lost. It's very important to try and provoke and pinch. And I've been given the task to do that, so I have to. Just yesterday or day before, you did say, you're talking about pride in India. Just 2 days ago, you talked about you were at a festival in Bangalore. You attended 2 sessions and you felt shamed being both a man and an Indian. Give those examples and tally it with what you just said.
So, Sudeep, I know you are provocative, which is nice. A poet has to be provocative, but the context was totally different. I'm happy that you're doing this. Sabin did that festival, and in that festival there were many topics. One topic talked about the present dispensation not being up to the mark. Whoever was the talker was making judgment from a human point of view, and with his limited education and there are other forces that play in a big country like ours, which is diverse, which has much more, the essence is spirituality. Then I went to another session which was talking about abuse, and the abuse was given a gender, and it was given a male gender. I happen to be a male, so I just was, from that point of view, trying to say that I lose my pride when you say that it's only the main gender who abuse, And then I went to the session Punjab, and then they were talking about Urta Punjab. I'm a Punjabi, I'm a proud Punjabi, and I know Punjab is is the state which is the food bowl of the country. Many people live and can live because there is food in India. They created the revolution. And Punjab also is a state which has soldiers, which protects your land. Otherwise, deep down south, you would have been ransacked by so many other people. Every member has a soldier in Punjab. My own brother is an army guy. So I was basically trying to say that during a festival, when one sees that my pride is being taken away by talks which talk about there is a problem in the dispensation, there is a problem of abuse, which is gender. The thing was, why not look towards the essence? We are all part of wanting to correct whatever is wrong. And before you take it over, I just wanted to mention that, Sri Aurobindo, what has he done for us? And what is fantastic, which is again part of the festival celebrations, he has taken the wisdom from the past and he is using the latest contemporary techniques available to us to create an original future. We are all still under some kind of a colonial yoke where we have very few original thinkers. Most of us are very, very, very intelligent, but hardly anybody thinks. So that is why this title came, that how important it is to really look at the essence and let the superficial take care of itself so that we can take the next step in the evolution as we are putting an effort in all of it.
Yeah, it's also important, and I'll get to you, Nandini, it's also important to emphasize that festivals are safe places for people to talk. And if you do not allow the safe space to be open to various sides of the story, however skewed they may be, it will never get told. The fact that you was so moved or hurt or shaken was important because you wouldn't otherwise be thinking of that. It is important. Gendered or not gendered is a different question. There were 3 women talking about abuse. So they have a point of view, and we can go into statistics and all that, and it does feel terrible about, the way men behave in our country. They don't behave terribly well, most of them. But festivals are safe places because you do need a kind of consensual space where everybody knows that they are at least thinking, imagining, probing, and also listening. The listening is very important. And that's why you allow certain things within a festival space which otherwise is not possible, which is why it was there. And I'm glad, it made you move, but quickly, because he's a curator of the festival, so.
No, just give it. Curating, this is Bangalore Festival is my 4th festival that I've curated and, directed, which is smaller in scale with only 70 speakers. But think about Madhurabhumi Festival. We have 400 speakers, okay, across 4 days, and a place like Kerala, highly politically, politically active or hyperactive, we can term whatever it is. Imagine the role of a curator, and curating is a practice. Okay, I remember one session in the 2nd edition or so. It was in Malayalam, and it's called Theriyude Rashtriyam, which means the politics behind cuss words. So, how cuss words, or bad words, or I call you names, and so what is the politics behind that? So it got out of hand. People were talking about politics and class and all those sort of things. So it came out. And one beautiful thing about, as Sudeep said, about curating a festival is creating a platform for discussion. Essays, pays, and when I was doing this for Alliance University in Bangalore, and the VC said, anything goes, put it on me. You feel free, because we need to create. See, that doesn't mean that I agree with them. I'm just creating a space for discussion, and it's challenging. but it is also, so I know that we put together the session on abuse based on one writer's book, and so then yeah, sometimes get out of hand. That's the beauty of the festival. So at the end of the day, we are there and we are discussing now. We have different points of view, but we are not enemies. I just give it to.
Sabin, your festival was excellent. You did a great job, and you had a big lineup of different thoughts which create for the children. They start thinking originally. That was the main point. And it's just that sometimes when you see certain topics, there are certain slants which are not uplifting. They are just parallel. It's almost unnecessary to go there. It's just somebody's agenda being used on a particular kind of people. So when we can be free of that, we can really get to the essence.
I would have to tell you, just an aside, that talking about cuss words, if you are a Bengali, then a cuss word would be ulluk, which is an otter, which is a perfectly nice animal actually. But if you, in Bengali, it is a cuss word. So Bengalis don't follow any reason or politics when it comes to cuss words. But I'm going to just, jokes aside, just talk about what Lalit is saying. When I'm also a journalist, that's my day job. And as a cub reporter, it was my great privilege to interview the maestro Satyajit Ray. And I was barely 22 years old, very wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I asked him what only a 22-year-old can ask. I asked him why the countryside in Oshoni Shanke, or The Distant Thunder, his deeply, deeply disturbing film about the Bengal famine of 1943, why is it so pretty? Why is it so pretty? And I said, the film opens with these absolutely gorgeous women, and they are plucking some sag, and there are planes, war planes, flying overhead. It's exquisitely beautiful. And yet what you're talking about is 3 million people dead. So he said something, and it has stayed with me, simply because I've never managed to interview anybody quite like him since. He said, it's our way. There is death, there is ugliness perhaps, but there's always beauty. Always beauty. And I think that is the essence. I mean, for him and for me, because as a Bong, my presiding deities include the Right Honorable Mr. Ray. So I think that for me is the dictum that I live by.
I think, sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I think the cuss words that you referred to got me to share something there. A lady called Val Curtis, she was the director of the London School of Tropical Hygiene and Sanitation, because you spoke about the book. So she called herself an authority on disgustology. And like you talked about the religious connotation of cuss words, she looked at cuss words across cultures and which were those words that evoked disgust. Because there was also a way of dealing with lack of hygiene by referring, and she found interestingly that across geographies, across religion, across time, certain words, including human excreta, and these were words that were common. So there's also value for discussions like that, but if it's going to lead us to something higher, something that will solve human problems, etc. But if it's just emotions taking us into a spiral below, that may not necessarily. So I agree with you that we have to change the discourse, or at least. And the second point is also about Urta Punjab, the reference to it. But maybe in such forums, we should also talk about people like Guru Nanak Dev Ji. I mean, he and the whole Sikh religion, how it embodies. I've been fascinated myself learning Shabads, Gurbanis, singing them. You find that it has integrated geographically. You have compositions of Namdev Ji, who comes from modern day Maharashtra, Ravidas Ji, Trilochan Shastri, Baba Farid. So across religions, Sant Kabir. So these are Sufis. I mean, you have different religious denominations, different Trilochan Shastri, Ravidas, the so-called the caste system, cutting across it, embracing it. And we should. I mean, I think that's a very contemporary, modern way of looking forward rather than, again, digging the whole thing. And that's where tomorrow happens to be the famous Uttar Para speech anniversary, Sri Aurobindo. It's tomorrow that he gave the Uttar Para speech. In that context, I mean, after he was released from Alipur jail and this absolutely life-changing point of inflection, the experiences he had of Krishna Kali and also his interaction with Swami Vivekananda that happened. And I think it would be great if he spoke, he said, we all, and I think those of us also have a responsibility, if you look at the fundamental duties enshrined in the Constitution, not just our rights and entitlements. I think with all this, openness for critical thinking, for trying to provoke, etc. But I think end of the day, we also have a very sacred responsibility for our country and the world to like Sri Aurobindo said, if you can teach by lecture, by example and inspiration. So end of it, it should culminate in that and not just create more confusion. And I couldn't agree more about beauty. So I also want to use this opportunity to invite you all. There is a special city which has been founded by Mother based on the direct action of Sri Aurobindo called Auroville, which I have the privilege of now working at. And it's meant to be a city for men and women from across the world of goodwill, as she said, to bring in harmony, but in the process of building a city, because something like putting a jigsaw puzzle, you know what it's going to look like, you know what this carpet is eventually going to look like, but the fact that you're putting it all together, human nature, the conflicts, the doubts, the concerns, how do we deal with it collectively, how do we sort out our own, because it's not just about the gloss and the presentation, but it's about the glow from within that each one of us as human beings are here to do. So we sort out our own yoga, all life is yoga, as we create a collective yoga. So thank you.
I'm glad that the last two words were exactly what we were hoping to hear. You talked about beauty, and you talk about the glow. I mean, what better way, really? In fact, we all will publicly take your offer, because we would love to go to Auroville and see it, because there are barriers there, you need passes and so on and so forth. So if you can just take us, or any of us who are here, I'm here for a few days, I'll be really happy to see it in a different way. My grandmother was a devotee here, and I came here as a young person many times, stayed in the ashram. But in fact, I kept saying that my visual remembrance was all the street signs used to be in French and Bangla at the time. And that's what I took back. But I think we should end on, because we can talk endlessly, we're all wordsmiths. On the note of beauty and inner glow, how beautiful is that? Maybe just the essential mantra of Om Mani Padme Hum, oh, the jewel in the lotus. Thank you, all of you, such wise, radiant-filled people. And look at the faces. There's so much joy here. And that's all that matters. Thank you.
We will have now a poetry session with Sudeep and Abhinav. Please come over onto the stage. This will be followed by a concert by Mahesh and Hari. And we have a surprise for you.